Afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Breaker School of Lifelong Learning. Today we have Dr. Tannen, the psychologist that is here in our building. Some of you may recognize her if you've seen her down in the lobby. She's here today and she will offer today's presentation. She will be answering questions at the end. Just make sure your question is nice and loud. She will be repeating your questions because we are recording it and it will be shown on the Breakers channel later, probably tomorrow, once Molly gets it cleared through the Breakers channel. So without further ado, I will allow Dr. Tannen to take over. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Can everybody hear me? Everybody can hear me. It was funny, I joked this morning about wondering if my top was camera ready, not knowing that I would be on camera. And I was asking Christina, had I known I was on camera, would I have worn something different? Well, it's moot now. Anyway, welcome. I talk here, I try to provide something that you can take away with you, a couple of simple ideas. I don't want to just lecture you about how to healthy age. So for those of you who know me, for those of you who might have been in my office at some point, there are several things that generally come up, but I wanted to start by reading something to you, and I'll have a copy of it for you later, because I think I capture part of what I think is helpful for people, especially in these very troubled times. And it's called Autobiography in 5 Chapters. Chapter 1, I walk down the street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I fall in. I am lost. I am helpless. It isn't my fault. It takes forever to find a way out. Chapter 2, I walk down the same street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I still don't see it. I fall in again. I can't believe I'm in the same place. It isn't my fault. It takes a long time to get out still. Chapter 3, I walk down the same street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I see it. I still fall in. It's habit. It's my fault. I know where I am. I get out immediately. Chapter 4, I walk down the same street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I walk around it. Chapter 5, I walk down a different street. You know, dawned on me is much of what people talk about today, these days, is resilience, right? That's a word I don't know if you hear a lot of, but we talk about resilience, the ability to bounce back in the face of adversity. Offers us things that we didn't want, didn't ask for, caused us pain and suffering. How do we understand it? How do we cope with it? How do we hopefully move beyond it, especially those things over which we don't have control? So what appeals to me about this autobiography in 5 chapters, which was originally written for people with addiction, right? That this was one of the ways to possibly break an addictive pattern, because we fall into habitual ways of being, was it represents a journey, right? How can we make substantive changes in our life in the face of suffering? Now, this is something that I've thought about well before the pandemic, but obviously the pandemic has required people to be resilient in ways that they didn't imagine. Now, almost 2.5 years into the pandemic, the research shows that people 65 or older actually have done better with respect to coping and resilience than any other age group. That may surprise some of you, it may not surprise some of you, but when you think about all of the things that you have lived through in terms of history, your own history and personal history, it might not be surprising. But there are some additional issues with respect to aging that force people to be resilient in ways that they didn't think they could. Obviously, physical changes, health problems, chronic health pain, functional limitations, not being able to do what you want, when you want, whenever you want. And these are issues for people before the pandemic, but health changes also can change function. They can change how you feel about yourself. They can change how you relate to others and your environment. Their world becomes smaller and smaller, their physical world becomes smaller, but also one's intellectual and relational world can become smaller too, requiring some capacity to develop resilience. Obviously, loss. The older we are, the more losses we're going to experience. It's inevitable, you know. Those are the kinds of things that we can expect, but there are other stressors that are not often talked about but are every bit as real. And that's things like living on a fixed income, having needs and not the money to pay for them, not having access to what you want, not having a support system that understands what you need. Those are the kinds of things that can resilience. But when we think about resilience, we need to have a working definition. I promise you, if you did a Google search, looked up resilience, you'd probably see 10 million hits. It is what people are talking about now, but it needs to be defined in a way that you can hold on to. And one of the definitions that the American Psychological Association talks about is resilience is a process of adapting well in the face of adversity, trauma, tragedy, or threats and significance. So, in order to be resilient, you have to adapt to a stress or a threat. It involves bouncing back from difficult experiences, and it also involves profound. So people in this room who have tragedy and pain, but have still found a way to live a life that matters to them, has still found a way to engage, has still found a reason to get up every day. That is a part of resilience. You know, when you're able to tolerate adverse events, it doesn't mean you like them. It just means that you're able to tolerate them. That you have self-awareness that allows you to recognize your own emotions. So, and also to be resilient, you have to have some knowledge of yourself. You have to know what your triggers are, the things that you're good at, and the things where you are vulnerable. You know, you have to accept change as inevitable. You know, trying to embrace it, which is thing to do, but the research always also shows that people over the age of 65 are actually much better at adaptation than people younger. So the stereotype of older adults as being rigid and inflexible, that is only true if you were rigid and inflexible as a younger adult and a middle-aged adult. But in general, older adults tend to be more flexible because they've had more practice at it. Resilience is a practice, therefore. It is not a personality trait. It is often assumed, well, they're just a resilient person. Well, they've had to be resilient. It's not something that you're born with, it's something that you learn. It's also something that you can cultivate. You can be taught resilience, and there are a few strategies that I can, explain to you that might make that a little more helpful. Some of the markers of resilience, like how do you know that you might have some resilience? Because it's not all or nothing. Usually the things that don't get the most press are some of the things that are most important. And people who are resilient have the capacity to make realistic plans and to take steps to carry them out. Meaning they're good problem solvers. People who are resilient may feel overwhelmed, understandably, by the pain and the threats of life around them, but eventually they find something that they can do. It's not only about finding meaning in your life, it's also about making a plan, being a good problem solver. It is managing strong feelings and impulses, right, in the face of stress, fight, flight, or fight, right? Our brain is absolutely flooded with stress hormone, right? Ask anybody who gets frustrated by waiting to talk to the people at Comcast, AT&T, the endless frustration of being put on hold. people not listening to you, yelling at the automated system, thinking that it's going to respond differently. Generally, that is accompanied by increased heart rate, sweaty palms, changes in respiration. When people are angry, blood flow goes to your hands because you want to fight. When you're scared, it goes to your feet because you might want to run or you might freeze. So the fight, flight, or fright response in relation to chronic stress erodes one's ability to feel good. It has negative effects. But there are things that people can do about it and do it all the time. Now, for anybody who has ever come to see me, my working assumption is that you guys have a lot of strengths that you don't know about. You may be coming to see me because you're suffering, but people have a lifetime of success. They don't judge it as success, but you don't live to be as old as people are today with the list of problems they have and not be strong, not believe in something, not have some sense of purpose. Obviously, depression, anxiety, chronic pain, PTSD, complicated loss, all of the things that can erode people's ability to access their natural resilience might lead them to get help. And those would be the times to get help if the level of your suffering is such that you're unable to cultivate your own resilience, to come up with plans that make sense, to have relationships that are meaningful for you, to just embrace your day. Then those are the types of things that might necessitate getting professional help. But having stress in your life is not a pathological state. It's being alive. Life is not easy all the time. So the other thing that I think is really important and to recognize yourself, you may be resilient with a sense of autonomy. If you're one of those people that don't like to be told what to do, you're going to live life on your own terms. You're going to, you're not going to go with the flow if it doesn't work for you. If you're able to be calm under pressure, when everything around you, the sky is falling, everybody's hair is on fire, but you're able to maintain a perspective, you might be resilient. Optimistic about anything, whatever it is in your life. If you get excited because you like dessert, if you're excited because the day is pretty and you want to go outside because you talk to a friend, you pet your dog, whatever it is, optimism, finding just small things in your life, and more importantly, because you believe your life believing your life matters is believing that other people's life matters. So altruism, reaching out to people. I've been in this building, this is my 20th year, and I tell you, I am deeply moved by the relationships that are cultivated by people in this building. How caring, how people take care of each other. They might get angry that somebody seems like they're forgetful, they don't know where they're going, they don't look really clean, they're wandering the building, but chances are 3 people have gone to the front desk to say, I'm worried about so-and-so. They know each other's doctor's appointments. They, know when the dog people had a vet appointment. Being able to care about each other is an essential component of resilience, and it makes life better. Adaptability and flexibility. Dogged persistence. I imagine if you or anybody you know are the type of people who don't let it go, you won't stop till you get it. It might make you stubborn, but it also makes you persistent, and you cannot be resilient. Into it, if the persistence is causing trouble in your other parts of your life, if you can't see the forest for the tree, if actually all you're looking at is one leaf and a vein on the leaf, and you don't see the tree and you don't see the forest, well, then maybe you might have some problems. But in general, it is essential. But, so I don't know if everybody heard the gentleman in front, but what he talked about is the idea that being persistent is critical. If you don't know how to do something, you keep asking, you figure out how to do it.
You give you a great deal of satisfaction.
Well,
Get the problem solved.
which, absolutely, and I will get to that. One of the things that you can cultivate in terms of cultivating your own sense of resilience is competence. Learn something. I can't tell you how many people have told me they would never be able to use a smartphone, they wouldn't be able to use a computer. Technology was out of reach. No, they couldn't go someplace by themselves. No, I can't go in the dining room and eat alone. Well, why can't you? Like, do things you've never done before. I remember, I've said this to many people, and they really would like my head on a platter, is the idea that people will tell me their age, and they'll tell me one of two things. One, it doesn't matter, or two, I don't have to do it anymore. And I will ask, where is the memo? I didn't get it, where I'm a certain age and I don't have to do anything I don't want to do. What is that? What is, we all have to do things we don't want to do, but sometimes we have to do things because we need to. One of the things that happens with people who are having difficulty cultivating their own sense of capacity and resilience is they avoid. Avoidant coping is one of the most powerfully insidious forms of undermining your own resilience. Don't do it. Put it off. You know, it's acts of omission. I just won't do it. I'll put it off till later. Pretty soon I'll get used to not doing it, and another aspect of my life can be put on the lost box. So this idea that in an unfamiliar place, we expose ourselves to those things we might be afraid of actually increases our sense of efficacy. It increases our sense of resilience. One of the things that comes up a lot in the resilience literature, I get a lot of blowback from the introverts in my life, is this idea of social competence and sociability. People who are resilient have some capacity for social competence. That does not mean that you are a cheerleading joiner who suddenly enjoys the limelight. Introverts can be as introverted as they want to be, but need to have some capacity for social competence. Because when you are socially competent, your world becomes bigger. And if your world becomes bigger, you might be able to ask somebody for help so you don't get stuck. Other hallmarks of resilience is this idea of recovery, that you rebound from stress and you return to a balanced state. Now, obviously, for any of you who've had medical problems, there's nothing at times more destabilizing than a fall. Falls are traumatic events, right? Even if the injury is not serious, the reverberations from falls can occur across every area of one's life. And recovery from a fall requires people to be resilient in ways that can feel unfair, but are necessary. And having worked with enough people who've had falls, watching them slowly readjust, re-regulate, make accommodations and plans in their life to stay upright. And meaning, even though their physical world might be smaller, is essential if you're going to age in a way that's meaningful for you. Sustained purpose. It is never for me to tell people what matters. And finding something in your life that matters. It can be your friend, activism, it can be literature, obviously be spirituality. It can be any number of things, but getting up each day with some sense of purpose. People who are resilient find things to do.
It's not what happens to you. You choose to react to it.
Yes, the difference between being active and proactive, right? But, you know, the thing about resilience is we can be resilient in some areas of our life and need great work in others, right? Nobody is resilient in every area of their life. Some people can be remarkably resilient in the face of physical issues.
I mean, you can choose to
And I will open this up for questions and observations, but this idea that we believe that recovery is possible. Recovery doesn't mean I go back to the way I was before this bad thing happened. That's not what that means. Recovery means that I have reorganized myself and incorporated this in my life. Well, one example of this is I'm in a room with people during COVID, and some people are masked and some people aren't. During the beginning of the pandemic, this building was shut down. This was not possible. People were in their apartment for I don't know how many months, many. So, the idea that anything that mattered disappeared. And one of the things that I worked on with every person in this building, outside of this building, and regardless of age, is how I decided to cultivate my own resilience in the face of this horrible thing that who knew we would be talking about this 2.5 years later and 1 million lives later. Is this idea that this is time we're never going to have again. We're never going to have a time when we're locked down like this. What are we going to do with this time? How are we going to use it? So for everybody that I took care of, we came up with our own sort of emotional first aid kit. We said, okay, we've got nothing else to do now but to talk about all the stuff that you haven't wanted to talk about. Let's deal with that. So we dealt with old trauma. We dealt with habitual ways of being. If people were living in clutter, they cleaned up their apartments. If they were reluctant to engage in any kind of relaxation training, we practiced that. We took the areas where people were most vulnerable during the state of the pandemic, and we said, let's do this. Time's going to go by anyway. What are we going to do with it? That was a way to cultivate resilience. And what we did is we looked at our notes from 2020 and 2021 that you weren't doing when this started. It's resilience. I think it's really important the role of ageism. We know racism and sexism, classism, but there's also ageism, this idea that old people are only a certain way. And people who are older are probably the worst perpetrators of ageism, right? How many times have we seen somebody and looked at them and said, oh my God, shoot me before that's me. Never stopping to consider the idea that the person you just pointed at was happy to get up in the morning. They believed their life mattered. The idea of ageism is really powerful, and anybody who knows me, I will say to them, if you want your life to get better, you're going to be uncomfortable, and you're going to have to do something. And that's my way of communicating respect, that you're going to be uncomfortable, but you're uncomfortable anyway, so let's do something different. That's a hallmark of resilience, adaptation to change, taking risks, understanding that things didn't always work out before, they may not work out now, but how am I going to reorganize myself to have a life that matters? And I don't decide what matters to a person. Leads to the issue of growth. That is one of those words that I can't really define it for people, but we do know that adversity and trauma and pain can change us in all sorts of ways. And what does growth look like? Well, for people who have post-traumatic stress disorder, people who have had terrible things happen to them across their life that shouldn't have happened, they didn't ask for, and it's not their fault. How do they incorporate these things into their life and still have a sense of power and strength? Meaning, that's what post-traumatic growth looks like for people. So far, how am I doing for time? Oh, wow. The other thing, I want to point out a couple of things. And some of this you can find online for any of you who are computer literate. People, especially mental health people, like to come up with things that all have the same letter. And I found something that's called the 7 C's of resilience. I'm sure there are more, but I will read them to you. Control. People who are resilient have to know what they can and cannot control. I think about that as the serenity prayer on steroids, right? That the serenity prayer being having the, the wisdom to know what I can change, accepting what I can't, right? So I'm not saying my point. Competence, that people have things that they are good at. When you're depressed, when you're anxious, when you can't move your body the way you used to, if your memory doesn't work the way you used to, if things just aren't the way they used to, it can erode people's sense of competence. But people are good at things. The issue is they don't always value it. So control, competence, and with competence comes confidence. I'm not talking about a false sense of self. I'm talking about the wisdom of having inhabited your life and your body for how many decades, and knowing what you're good at, knowing what you're not good at. Confidence is what's attractive, right? It draws people to you. Connection. Again, connection doesn't mean being the most social person in the room. Connection can be a sense of community and support. That can happen in any possible way. It could be a sports team, it could be friends, it could be anything, but just sense of connection and community. Character. Our character matters. Having developed a sense of character and moral characteristics, an awareness of what is right and wrong for you. Having a strong character also obviously leads to increased confidence and control because it allows you to know who you are and what you believe. Coping, that's a big one. Coping does not mean just acquiescing. Coping is using every tool in your box to navigate, eliminate, overcome, work around. There are lots of different ways that people can cope. Some are healthier than others, and contribution, offering something to others develops a sense of gratitude. Much of the resilience literature, much of the healthy aging literature talks about gratitude. I'm not crazy about parsing it just into being, older adult issues. Gratitude certainly lightens one's load. Finally, I will make my pitch for what the research calls therapeutic lifestyle changes, TLCs. Again, these people love acronyms. And those are the things that we do or don't do every day that have a profound impact on how you feel. So if you're not moving, if you're not eating well, if you don't have things that interest you, if you're never in nature, if you never reach out to other people, chances are you're not going to feel good. And if you don't feel good, it's very difficult to be resilient, right? So what you do, and I remember during the pandemic, how painful it was for people to not be able to move their physical bodies. I actually thought it was dangerous for people to not be able to move. It increased isolation and loneliness. Physical activity and social isolation, in fact, are the most dangerous things that can happen for people as they get older. So if I'm alone, not moving, chances are you're going to have greater difficulty cultivating a sense of resilience and competence in your life. So that's kind of my overview. Anything that I said today is probably a topic in and of itself. It could be a course. So what I wound up doing is just sort of an overview. So if there was anything I would want you to take away, that resilience requires change. Change is inevitable, but it can be falling into the whole, whatever your particular whole is. And it's very optimistic, but it's not blind optimism. It's optimism based on people's capacity, which I am a true believer. So, does anybody have any questions? Yes.
Yes, I just, various things from people and that type of also, I don't run marathon.
Here you are. So part of, I'm gonna try and summarize what you so eloquently said for whoever may or may not listen to this later, is the idea, first of all, part of resilience, there is an interpersonal, interactive part, because if you're around other people, you can learn from them. You can watch what they're doing, I think is part of
Yeah, that's.
what.
They put you down. Okay.
Yeah, there is something to be learned from others. And I think the other issue that you talked about is the idea of persistence, which was brought up earlier, that you want to do something and you do it and you get better at it and you have a passion for it. And that's living your best life. Yes.
I'm wondering if there would be a danger of individual seeing something or hearing something that occurs in somebody else's life and says, well, I can do that. And then they absolutely, whatever reason, they can't. How does one that and say, okay?
I
You know what I'm trying to
I
say?
do. I think there's a phrase for that. I didn't invent it, but I believe it's known as compare and despair. You know, that happens constantly. People look around at others and make assumptions about who they are, what they're doing, and wonder why they can't do it for themselves, as opposed to considering what they bring to the table. People have great capacity. So it's one thing for me to be motivated by what something else does, like the gentleman who ran all the marathons. Well, I might not be able to run a marathon, but I might be able to move more, right? I don't have to imitate what other people are doing to be inspired by it. There's a lot of inspiration in this building. You just have to know how to look for it.
But I think it's important that we recognize that because it sounds attractive, it sounds exciting, and I'd like to do that. I can't.
Well, I think that, you know, what was pointed out is that if we're looking at what other people do and we actually make an assessment and discover we cannot do it, how do we handle, how does our ego handle the idea that there are things that other people can do that I can't? Well, understand that I can't do everything. I was never able to do everything. And if I choose to be diminished and defined only by what I cannot do, I'm going to be pretty unhappy. I mean, it's, you know, for people who use walkers, they may wish that they just needed a cane. For people who use cane, they wish they didn't need anything. For people who have wheelchairs, right, we're always sometimes wishing we didn't have what we had and didn't have what we needed, right? Well, without the cane, without the walker, without the wheelchair, you're not going anywhere, right? And that can be a choice, right? People wear glasses because they need them. They wear hearing aids, or should, because they need them. Like, they're called assistive devices for a reason. They're supposed to assist, right? So we can embrace it as something that we need, or we can howl at the moon that and allow it to define us. And I'm not saying any of these things are easy.
Just
So-
want to say one more thing.
Yes.
I think we have to recognize for the 100 mile. I had not think that I could do it, or you hear the phrase, if you really want to do it, you'll do it.
Well, I think that what up is the idea that there are things that we actually cannot do,
Right.
right? And are we going to beat ourselves up for those things we cannot do? How do we deal with what is? There is this notion, and again, it's in the literature, it's very interesting, and it can sound harsh, but it's not. It's called radical acceptance. There are some things that have happened. Change it. No matter how many times I talk about it, cry about it, pray about it, they are the things that happened to me. So how can I reorganize my life around this thing that I didn't want and still believe that my life is worth living? You know, so what we say to ourselves, how we label it, how we plan our day, those things all matter. Yes.
You are
What, and I don't know if everybody heard that, but the idea that there are some things that will be lost to me. I cannot do them anymore for whatever reason, because of age, because of changing vision or hearing, motor dexterity, interest, cognition, finances, whatever it is. So, okay, that can still be a remarkably powerful part of my life. That doesn't mean that I can't find something else that I might like. That is, again, part of the resilient spirit is finding something to do. I have a picture in my office behind my desk. So when people who are with me and don't, are just sort of, kind of spacing out because what I'm saying is no longer interesting. And it's a picture, watercolor picture of this house and trees that my great-grandmother painted. And I have it framed in my office because she didn't start painting until she was in her 70s, and I think she lived to be 90-something. And is it like a masterpiece? I don't know. I think it's charming. And I have it in my office for every time somebody told me, well, I can't do art. I have something charming and framed in a purple mat in my office. So this idea that you go and do something that you would never ever do, it doesn't interest you. I don't do that. Well, who says you can't, right? That is the cycle of inertia. I've never done it, so I'll never do it. I generally tell people, go try something, and even if you don't like it, you are victorious because you tried it. So, yes. Okay. And that's a really powerful point. It has 2 points. One is the idea that things happen to people that cause legitimate anger, that people feel deep, deep anger and anguish at the things they're no longer able to do, at the losses they've sustained, that the life that is going on around them, and very often isolation and lack of support is a real problem for people. So, asking somebody who's in the angry stage of wherever they are to suddenly be resilient is not always easy. You have to acknowledge the anger. You have to, I don't like, to use, psychological terms when I'm giving presentation, but you hear validation, right? People's anger need to be acknowledged and validated that things happen.
anger.
It-
Works against
Well,
it can help you.
anger is a complicated thing. So for people about what's happening out in the world, about what's happened to them, what's happened to their family, people they love. What do you do with the energy? How do you harness it into something that isn't destructive? I am not opposed to anger as an emotion. We all have it, just like anxiety.
You
And
turn anger into love.
well, that takes much work. Doesn't happen that easily. Can it happen for some? But anxiety, there is so much anxiety in this building sometimes, I really think it's going to radiate. But it's energy, So if somebody is angry or anxious, that's energy. We can do something with it. Get off their couch, less is happening. So you just start where people are and accept that's where they are right now. It's not me telling people where they need to be, it's acknowledging where life that is meaningful to them. It's not for other people to tell us what's important. And those are the things that actually do contribute to healthy aging, whatever that is and whatever that means. Yes. Every day. Yes, people can cultivate resilience in all sorts of ways. You know, and part of cultivating resilience has to do with, first of all, basic things. You need to take care of yourself. You can't be resilient if you're not eating well, if you're not getting enough sleep, if you're not getting enough exercise, if you don't have connections with people, right? If you have no contact with nature, if you have no outside interests, the things you do every day help cultivate, right? Because if you take better care of yourself, you're better able to manage stress, right? So there are a lot of mindfulness programs here in the building, Tai Chi, yoga, deep breathing. They're one of the most effective ways that people can cultivate their own sense of resilience because they're calmer. You can't be in a constantly agitated state, overreacting to everything, and come up with a plan that works, right? Yes. Well, again, that's a really complicated question about how can you help other people cultivate resilience. A part of it depends on what the role is. If you're a family member, caring for another family member, if it's a friend, I mean, there aren't any hard and fast answers about how you help somebody else. Really, what you want to be able to do is help them help themselves. Right? This gentleman's example about being diagnosed with something difficult in 2011 and essentially being told, that's it, you know, this is what we can expect. We can expect rapid decline. And how people don't know everything. That gets to part of what you discussed earlier, a sense of persistence, right? People say you can't walk. Well, if people tell you you're not going to be able to walk and you believe them and you don't even try, and not only don't you try to walk, you don't move, right? Physical inactivity and social isolation are probably at the top of the list of things that make resilience almost impossible because you can't not moving your body, you're not moving your brain. If you're not moving your brain, nothing's going to change. And again, if you tend to be more isolative, that is not to say that you have to go join. What it might mean is that you just talk a little bit more, you acknowledge people, you say hello. In order to be resilient, you need to do something, however small. It doesn't have to be. Look what I did. Well done. Giving yourself a pat on the back. None of this is easy. If it were easy, we wouldn't be talking about it, and resilience would not be needed. I think that covers much of today, or is there any last quick question? Yes, sir.
Stay in the copy. I'd like to have a
I think I heard you say you wanted more of an explanation about coping.
copy.
It means that you have to deal with something that's difficult that you didn't want, not like? And how do you come up with a plan? How do you keep it from defining you, to ruining your mood, ruining your day, making it impossible to make plans? We have to often cope with things we don't like. A simple example that always comes to mind are the elevators. There are four elevators, not always working, and 400 people in this building at 34 floors. If people get irritated and angry and frustrated in exactly the same way as if they're experiencing it for the first time, I would argue that they are not coping. And the only thing they are doing is eroding their ability to deal with things that are unpleasant, because the elevators are not going to change. There's only four of them. So those are the small strategies where you practice your deep breathing, you chat with somebody while you're waiting.
Because life is
Always. Yes, life is up and down. All right. Well, thank you for some very, very thoughtful questions. I hope it was camera clear. And I have, if anybody would like a copy of the autobiography in 5 chapters as sort of your own way to figure out where you might get stuck, I can give it to Christina, and whoever wants it can have one. All right, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks everyone for attending. Next Tuesday, we have Nurse Alex coming out talking about the importance of your yearly physicals, your yearly appointments and tests that your doctor orders every year, and why those tests are really important. 2 weeks after that, on June 6th, we are going to do our outdoor, weather permitting, outdoor, I'm calling it a car wash. We're gonna wash walkers and rollators and scooters and canes, and we're gonna have a really great time outside. So come out on the patio, and we're gonna have a great time with refreshments and all kinds of stuff outside at our car wash. And then on June 8th, the DMV will be here, and there's a sign-up sheet back on the table. Spots are limited for the Secretary of State DMV. I'm not sure what you guys call it here in Michigan. We call it the Secretary of State. And they will be here. Spots are limited, so if you need to renew your state ID or driver's license, sign up back there. Molly has a sign-up sheet. Thank you all for coming out. If you have additional questions, I'm sure that she would be happy, Dr. Tannen would be happy to stay and answer a couple more questions. If you need a handout, I do have them.